Biblical Hebrew 2, chapter 25, Niphal, weak verbs. Our approach to the weak verbs here, as it was with the kal, is to focus on the strong verb forms. So know the Niphal strong forms well for the perfect, imperfect, imperatives, infinitives, and participles. And based on that, we'll always look at the strong form and compare it to the weak form. And with the knowledge of the diagnostic features, you'll be able to identify the weak forms without too much trouble in most of the cases. So the third aleph, Niphal, weak verbs, so having that aleph there at the end. If you remember from the beginning of last semester, we talked about the quiescence of an aleph. So having an aleph at the end impacts the vowels, impacts the pronunciation, but doesn't essentially impact the consonants or the main form of the verb. So it's not going to be too hard to identify the third aleph weak forms. The nun prefix is maintained, so that's the main marker of the Niphal. And the imperfect and all of these imperative, infinitive forms, if you notice, we have the maintenance of the dagesh in the first letter and also the kametz under that first letter, as we do in the Niphal strong forms as well. So not too many differences if you look across the board here between the strong and weak forms. The main difference occurs in the stem vowel. So the third aleph perfect form, for example, here in the strong form, niktal, has a patach there under the second consonant in that root. And with nimtza, we have a kametz there. So that's the impact of the quiescent aleph at the end, lengthening that verb there. If you look through the chart, the remaining forms of these verbs, the differences are going to be pertaining to the stem vowels. So sometimes it's going to have this kametz. Some of the occurrences are going to have a tzere or a vocal shava. So slight changes in that stem vowel, but otherwise across the board, these are mostly staying the same as with the Niphal strong verbs. With third hey Niphal weak verbs, we have similar changes that happen with kal third hey verbs as well. So in these situations, the main thing that happens is the third hey that is part of the root of the verb is replaced by a hey vowel letter. If you remember that occurring when we talked about the kal weak verbs. So that's going to cause slight changes in the vowels at the end of the verbs especially. But again, these maintain the main diagnostic of the Niphal, the nun prefix, and also in the imperfect, imperative, infinitive construct forms, we have a preservation of the dagesh there of the assimilated nun, as well as the kametz under the first root letter. So main diagnostics of the features of the Niphal strong verb forms are maintained. If you look at the perfect form of bana in the Niphal, becomes nivna or nivneta. So a couple of examples there. So that stem vowel can change to a kametz, or it can change to a tzere yod. So the hey has disappeared from the root in both of those third hey verbs, and it's caused a few changes there in the vowel patterns at the end, but nothing too much to be worried about. You can still look at those and tell that this is a Niphal, and they still have the regular Niphal suffixes, so that helps you identify the person, gender, and number as well. So across the board here, not too many changes other than with the stem vowels, which change, and the loss of the hey at the end of the verb causes changes there with the vowels as well. So with first gutturals, if you remember, gutturals cause vowel changes as well. So this is going to cause changes to the prefix of the Niphal, and then the Niphal gutturals also reject the assimilating nun, and they don't take the dagesh, so that's going to cause compensatory lengthening in the prefix vowels. So if you look at the first guttural perfect form with the strong verbs, we have niktal. In the weak verbs with the first guttural, we have ne'etzav. So these forms take a segel prefix vowel impacted by the guttural there in the first position. And then if you look at the imperfect and the ones that follow after that, the ones that would expect the assimilation of the nun from the Niphal into the guttural, that assimilation is rejected. So with the prefix with ye'atzev, we now have a rejection of the Dagesh Niphal assimilation, and that gives us a tzere under the yod with the imperfect. So the hirek has lengthened there to a tzere. And that's seen also in the imperative and infinitive construct as well, where we would expect the nun to assimilate as a dagesh into the R1, the first letter there, the ayin as a guttural rejects that, causing compensatory lengthening. The kametz, however, stays the same under that first letter in the imperfect, imperative, infinitive construct, so that is still a marker there to help you identify these as Niphal. Then the first nun Niphal weak verbs, so these cause some problems because if you remember from kal, first nun verbs, the nun often disappears at the beginning. And then also since Niphal has a nun prefix, that causes some confusion since we would normally expect two nuns to occur there at the beginning of a Niphal weak verb that begins with a nun. So with the perfect form, for example, the verb natsal, so the root of the verb here is nun tzade lamed, but this is also a Niphal, and so the nun has assimilated into the tzadi there in first nun weak verbs. So the problem here, the difficulty, is when you come across a form like nitzal and you're trying to identify the root and also the stem, and you have to keep in mind that if it's the first nun Niphal, then the nun of the stem has assimilated into the tzadi. So if you notice, the tzadi there has a dagesh, so that's identifying the presence of an assimilated nun there. But if you look at the niktal strong perfect form above, and then the nitzal weak perfect form below, they both maintain a hirek there under the prefix nun, and they both maintain a patah stem vowel. So ultimately not too many changes other than the loss of that first nun that assimilates as a dagesh forte into the second root letter. The imperfect, imperative, infinitive, participles pretty much stay the same. So yikatel in the strong form is yinnatel in the weak first nun form. So those are all pretty good, pretty similar. With the infinitive absolute, one of the forms we have nitzol. So that one has also assimilated the nun from the first root letter, so that the root there is natsal, with also having a nun prefix. So there's not two nuns are not put next to each other. So you can't have the Niphal prefix nun and then the first root letter of the verb also being a nun. So there that Niphal has assimilated, or that nun has assimilated into the tzadi, and the same thing with the participle as well. Also has a nun assimilated from the root of the verb. Generally, most of these look very similar if you look at the top row with the strong forms and then the bottom row. Not too many differences here. Then with the first yod, Niphal weak verbs, these can be tricky because the first yod often becomes lost, and the first yod verbs were originally first vav verbs, so in these forms that vav comes back. So the trouble with these is identifying the root form and being aware that a yod has potentially disappeared if we have a vav instead. So all of these, however, maintain the nun prefix there in the forms that are applicable, and then in the imperfect forms they maintain the dagesh doubling of that vav, and they maintain the kametz vowel under the first letter. So if you look at the perfect form, niktal becomes noshav. So the yod there has disappeared from the root yashav. We still have the nun prefix. we still have a patach stem vowel there. The main difference, of course, the loss of the yod, and then we have a holem vav there instead. So the vav comes back and is given a holem vowel. In the imperfect form, the strong form yikatel in the first yod form is yiv vashev, so nothing changes in that form, nothing changes in imperative or infinitive construct. There are no occurrences of the infinitive absolute in these first yod forms, so that can be omitted here. And then with the participle, the same thing happens as we had with the perfect form. The yod disappears, is replaced by a vav. We still have the kametz stem vowel. We still have the nun prefix there, but we have a holem vav instead of the hirek under the nun, leading into the rest of the participle form there. So not too many changes. The main point to remember is that if you have a vav showing up there, it has originally been a first, or this is originally a first vav verb that now is a first yod verb. So when you're looking it up in the dictionary, you have to look under yod, shin, beit to find noshav or whatever first yod verb you're looking for. So then the vocabulary for chapter 25. Afak, to turn, overturn, overthrow, destroy. Zana, to commit fornication, to be a harlot, to be unfaithful. Chara, to become hot, to burn with anger, become angry. Ra'ah, to be bad, to be evil. Sava, to be satisfied, to eat or drink one's fill. Shakach, to forget. Shamem, to be deserted, to be an uninhabited, desolated. Zakar, male or man. Hoshech, darkness. Migrash, open land or pasture. Mamlaka, kingdom, dominion, reign. Nahar, river or stream. Tzedek, righteousness, equity. Ro'eh, shepherd.